"Step aside," Cole commanded, his eyes locking onto Elena with unwavering authority. She stopped, one eyebrow slightly raised, but her expression remained calm and professional. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone steady and controlled. "Routine check," Cole replied, a smug grin spreading across his face. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. Can I see some identification?" Elena held his gaze, her sharp eyes assessing him in return. Slowly, she reached into her bag, each motion deliberate, as though carefully weighing the consequences of every action. When she handed over her ID, the atmosphere grew heavier, charged with unspoken tension. Who is she really? And what has Cole gotten himself into? If you're curious to uncover Elena's true identity and how she navigates this intense encounter, stay tuned for the full story. The story begins. It was an ordinary evening during rush hour at Union Terminal. The Grand Hall buzzed with life, the waves of people rushing through its vast space. The high-vaulted ceiling stood in silent witness to the chaotic symphony of hurried footsteps, crackling announcements, and the clattering sounds of trains arriving and departing. The air was thick with a blend of steel, asphalt, coffee, and the faint scent of gasoline from the trains below. Amid the bustling crowd of hurried passengers, Elena Carter stood out, though she made no effort to be noticed. Her presence was powerful yet subtle. At 37, Elena exuded a quiet confidence that made people glance her way. Her sharp black pencil skirt and tailored coat radiated professionalism, while the leather bag slung over her shoulder completed the sophisticated look. Each step she took was deliberate, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, a subtle announcement of her arrival. Her naturally styled hair framed her face, enhanced by a touch of makeup, but her sharp, alert eyes spoke volumes. Elena was no ordinary woman. She was a CIA agent, someone whose outward composure could not mask the decisiveness and sharpness honed through years of navigating high-stakes, risk-laden environments. Today, however, she wasn't on assignment. She was simply heading home after a long meeting. Everything about her, her leather bag, her every movement, spoke of unwavering confidence, yet a part of her remained ever vigilant. Elena wasn't just walking through the crowd, she was observing it. Her gaze was as sharp as a hawk's. But not everyone recognized her beauty and professionalism. Two uniformed officers broke away from the sea of people, their eyes locking onto Elena with an unmistakably unfriendly stare. Officer Cole, tall and muscular, wore an air of arrogance. The badge on his chest practically shouted power. His companion, Officer Ethan, younger and uncertain, seemed to follow Cole, though his nervousness was apparent in his awkward gestures and fumbling with his duty belt. Elena noticed them approaching. Though there was no apparent reason for them to approach her, she remained calm, maintaining her distance and steady pace. The sense of vigilance that pulsed through her was nothing new. After all, as a CIA agent, she was all too familiar with being prepared for the unexpected. "Ma'am," Cole called out, stepping directly into Elena's path with a smug grin, his voice dripping with feigned politeness that couldn't mask the contempt beneath. "I think we need to conduct a quick check." Elena stopped, raising an eyebrow slightly, her expression calm but alert. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone steady and professional. Cole moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Routine check," he replied, his grin widening. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. May I see your ID?" Though Cole's voice maintained a veneer of politeness, it was laced with clear disdain, as though he assumed Elena would offer no resistance, nothing to worry about. Elena sensed it, but she refused to let anger disrupt her composed demeanor. Her gaze sharpened, but her expression remained unchanged. "What description?" she asked, her voice firm yet resolute. Cole leaned in slightly, his arrogance more evident than ever. "We'll find out later." "Step aside," he said, gesturing for her to move to the side. Elena took a deep breath, her jaw tightening. She didn't look away from him as she slowly reached into her bag, pulling out her ID, each movement deliberate and measured, as if weighing every potential consequence of her actions. She handed it to Cole, who snatched it without a word of gratitude. His eyes narrowed as he read the information. "Federal agent?" Cole muttered, tilting the ID under the light, his voice thick with suspicion as his gaze tightened. Care to explain what you're doing here? He then glanced back at Elena, still standing firm, arms crossed. I'm on duty, she replied, her voice unwavering. Is that a crime? Ethan stood awkwardly behind Cole, looking back and forth between his colleague and Elena. Maybe we should call this in, he suggested hesitantly, his voice tinged with doubt. Relax, Cole barked, waving his hand dismissively as if to shoo away Ethan's worry, his gaze never leaving Elena. Then, with a mocking smile, he moved closer. What's in the bag? Anything you want to say before we check it? Elena exhaled through her nose, the flicker of her anger gone in an instant. Her voice remained calm, but there was a warning in it. You don't want to do that, she said evenly. Cole, unaware of the danger he was inviting, smirked, misinterpreting her composure as fear. Oh, really? He taunted, not waiting for her agreement, and grabbed her bag, yanking it open. The moment his hand touched the bag, Cole's confidence shattered. His fingers hovered over a gleaming badge under the lights of the train station. A CIA agent's badge, Elena Carter. Beside it was a Glock, its black matte surface a stark reminder of who they were dealing with. Cole's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as he read the badge. The arrogance he had exuded moments ago vanished without a trace. Behind him, Ethan stepped back, his face pale and bewildered. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to slice with a knife. Elena stood there, her hands still gripping the bag, her eyes locked on Cole, who had taken a step back. This wasn't the fear of being caught, but the alertness, the sharp awareness that every move she made now would determine not only her own fate but how society would confront racial discrimination and abuse of power. Cole froze, staring at Elena's badge, confusion and uncertainty plainly visible in his eyes. Elena, standing tall and unhurried, showed no sign of panic or anger. She was steady as a rock in the tide of suspicion and misuse of authority. Cole, Ethan stammered, his voice trembling with confusion. He looked back and forth between Elena and his partner, as if unable to grasp what was unfolding. Cole said nothing, continuing to hold Elena's badge, his eyes flicking from the badge to her face, unwilling to make direct eye contact. For a moment, he felt as though he were standing before someone not only with authority but someone who could make him answer for his arrogance and mistakes. Elena exhaled softly, her gaze fixed on Cole, who was now standing like a statue, completely passive. She knew that, whether Cole felt fear or confusion, it did nothing to erase the truth of his actions. Confronting racial prejudice was a matter that couldn't be avoided. Elena was not just standing up for herself, but for everyone belittled and disrespected by power abusers like Cole. Elena calmly moved forward, taking the bag from Cole's hand with slow, deliberate motions. She kept her eyes on him, her gaze cold and resolute. Now, she spoke, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Do you want to explain why you just harassed a federal agent? Cole fumbled, his words stumbling. We thought you might be a threat, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Elena raised an eyebrow, her voice chilling. A threat, she repeated. You think a woman in a skirt and heels is a threat? Or do you think you can do this because you assumed I wouldn't resist? Cole stared at her, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a sign of fear. But Elena's calmness only made him hesitate. She was not someone he could dismiss or violate without facing consequences. Despite his best efforts to conceal it, Elena's gaze had seen through every one of his thoughts. By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of surrounding passengers. A crowd was starting to gather, their phones held high, recording the scene. Cole quickly glanced toward the crowd, his once imposing arrogance now replaced with visible panic. Without hesitation, Elena pulled out her phone, pressed the record button and raised it. Record their names and badge numbers, she commanded, her voice clear and loud. Ethan, sensing the seriousness of the situation, quickly complied. Officer Ethan, badge number 47,823, he said, his voice low and hesitant. His face was ashen, as though he couldn't believe he was part of this situation. Elena shifted the camera toward Cole, who had now stepped back, his expression one of bewilderment. He knew the situation couldn't continue as it had before. Hesitating for a moment, he muttered his name and badge number. "You like rummaging through women's belongings during routine checks, Officer Cole?" Elena asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Let's see how your excuse holds up when your superiors watch this video tomorrow morning." The crowd had fully gathered now, their phones still trained on the scene. Elena was not only confronting Cole's provocation, but the stares from those around her, the witnesses and the scrutinizing gazes, were part of something larger. This was no longer just about confronting one officer. It was a part of a bigger fight, one against racial discrimination and the abuse of power in society. Cole surveyed the surrounding crowd, his former arrogance completely evaporating. All that remained was confusion and fear. In this moment, it was he who had to face the truth. Elena was no helpless woman he could easily manipulate. She was a woman of strength, decisiveness, and one ready to stand up for not only herself but for all those oppressed. Elena kept the camera in her hand, her gaze unwavering from Cole. She understood that today, she wasn't just winning a confrontation over a wrongful search, but also giving hope to all those who had suffered injustice, to all who quietly endured in silence. The scene at Union Terminal was charged with tension, but no one could ignore the undeniable truth that had been exposed. The crowd had gathered, their phones capturing a moment that would be impossible to erase from memory. Each click of a camera was a stark reminder to Officer Cole that he could no longer deny his actions. The oppression and racism that had been concealed for so long could no longer be hidden. Elena's eyes locked with Officer Cole's, her expression the very picture of calm. She had witnessed too many similar situations in her line of work, where the abuse of power had gone unchallenged. But this time, she had decided not to let anyone remain in the shadow of injustice. She knew that every step she took now would reverberate, not just for herself but for all those oppressed by those who misused power. Cole stood frozen, as though unable to admit his mistake. He had once wielded power, believing it gave him control over everything, certain there would be no resistance. But now, his power was being reversed entirely. Elena was no longer an anonymous woman. She was a CIA agent, and this time, she wouldn't allow the abuse of power to continue. "Did you think this was just a routine search?" Elena's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. "Do you realize that what you did was an abuse of power? Do you know that you were harassing someone, not just for their appearance, but because of their skin color?" Her words landed like a forceful blow, shattering the prejudices Cole had carried throughout his time as an officer. Her question wasn't just a critique of his actions. It was a challenge to the deeply ingrained racist mindset that plagued society. Cole began to feel the distinct shift in the atmosphere. The crowd's eyes were on him now, and they weren't looking at just a police officer, they were looking at a symbol of discrimination and abuse of power. He couldn't remain silent anymore. He couldn't continue to conceal his wrongdoing. Ethan, who had been standing behind Cole, could no longer stand idly by. Though he had tried to stay silent and uninvolved, as the situation escalated, he couldn't stay quiet. "We need to report this," he said, his voice faltering, his confusion evident. "This can't continue." Cole's eyes flashed with panic as he glanced at his colleague, seeking some form of solidarity. But no, Ethan was no longer on his side. In that moment, the divide between power and justice became clearer than ever. A young officer, seemingly weak and insecure, had been able to recognize the wrong and begin to realize that silence only perpetuates injustice. Cole no longer had the confidence to speak. His head hung low, unable to meet Elena's gaze. His actions had been exposed, and no matter how much he wished to justify or ignore it, the truth was undeniable. A part of him felt shame, but another part of him simmered with anger, not because his actions had been uncovered, but because he had been defeated by someone he had deemed weak. "What you did to me wasn't just a search," Elena continued, her tone unchanged. "It was discrimination, prejudice, and an abuse of power. You didn't expect a woman like me to stand up and defend my rights, did you?" Elena wasn't going to stop here. She knew that she had to do more, to make people more aware of what was happening in society. Only by holding people like Cole accountable could society begin to change. We cannot let the absurdity and abuse of power by those who consider themselves the ones in charge continue. Elena didn't stop after recording the video. She knew that she could spark a wave of change, not just for herself, but for those facing racial discrimination, for those who silently suffered in the shadows. The video quickly went viral. Headlines across media outlets exposed the incident as a glaring example of racism and abuse of power. As Elena's video spread online, reactions poured in like a tidal wave. At media outlets, headlines about Officer Cole's abuse of power quickly dominated the news cycle. Talk shows, articles, and social media buzzed with discussions about the event. Elena became a symbol of the fight against racism and the abuse of power in modern society. No one could turn a blind eye to what she had exposed. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the NYPD announced that an investigation into Cole's conduct would begin immediately, but Elena did not stop there. She used her CIA connections to arrange a meeting with the police department's captain. Armed with evidence, she presented her case and also provided data on other violations that her agency had uncovered. "This isn't just about me," Elena said firmly. "This is about holding people accountable." Officer Cole was swiftly suspended, and an internal investigation was launched. Officer Ethan, though reprimanded, felt deep remorse for not speaking up sooner. He reached out privately to Elena to apologize. "I should have said something," he confessed, his voice thick with regret. Elena listened but held her ground. "This isn't about apologies," she said. "It's about ensuring this doesn't happen again." Though Ethan felt remorse, Elena didn't allow him to easily escape the weight of his actions. She had witnessed far too much silence throughout her career, and this time she was determined not to let those at fault evade their responsibility. An apology wasn't what was needed right now. What she needed was real change, a commitment that no officer would ever act like Cole without facing the consequences. In parallel with pushing for the internal investigation, Elena began rallying support from human rights organizations and the community to create an oversight network. She knew that if change only rested on one individual, it wouldn't be enough to prevent similar abuses from happening elsewhere. Elena wanted to see reform in how law enforcement treated citizens, especially those from minority groups. 1 month after the Union Terminal incident, a major meeting was held between leaders from the CIA, NYPD, and civil society organizations to discuss police reform. Elena attended the meeting, and although she wasn't the head of the discussion, her words carried weight. She presented the data. The CIA had gathered, showing that the problem wasn't just one officer, but a long-standing system that needed to be changed. Elena's story had resonated widely, inspiring many. It wasn't just a simple incident between a woman and a police officer. It was a struggle for human rights and justice. Elena knew that when people stand up for what is right, they don't just change their own fate. They change the fate of their community, their society. Finally, Elena returned to the station. She boarded the train with a steady demeanor, no sense of urgency, this time without any interference. A week had passed since the Union Terminal event, and now she was on her way back to work. This wasn't a routine trip, but a journey that carried profound significance in her life. Everything seemed to have changed since she stood face to face with Officer Cole, since she made the decision to record the incident and not let the injustice fade into oblivion. As she sat down in her seat, a message from her CIA supervisor appeared on her phone. "Well done, mission accomplished." She didn't let herself feel complacent, but a subtle smile crossed her face. This wasn't the end, but a sign of a new beginning. Elena knew that everything she had done wouldn't just be a small victory. It was part of a larger plan, a strategy to change this society from the roots up. She recalled the conversations she had had with human rights organizations and the community in recent days. They were not just allies in this struggle, but also a tremendous source of motivation that pushed her to continue moving forward. She knew she couldn't change everything alone, but when those with shared goals come together, they can create monumental change. Elena understood that she had to keep seeking out allies, individuals who could join her in driving the necessary reforms, not just within the police force, but across the entire justice system. Elena smiled, knowing she had turned an unjust moment into a catalyst for change. Her story was a reminder of the power in standing up for what's right, even when facing adversity. What would you do if you found yourself in Elena's shoes? Would you dare confront injustice and speak out? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could inspire and drive change. If this story has made you reflect, don't hesitate to share it with friends and loved ones to spread the message of the power of justice and professionalism. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.